I never expected that the person stalking me would turn out to be my savior. But before I tell you that story, let me set the scene. I started a new high school in junior year, which might sound rough to most people, but not to me. I was an army brat, constantly moving from base to base, town to town, state to state. Unlike most military kids who complain about never putting down roots, I absolutely loved it. You make friends, hang out, keep in touch, and then move on to something new and exciting. Genuinely, I wouldn't have changed my childhood and teenage years for anything. My new school in 2016 was no different from the dozen others I'd attended. I won't name the school or the state, just being cautious. Some of you viewers seem like pretty weird folks. Not trying to be rude, but I hang out in those live streams sometimes. I'm just kidding. I love all of you. Now, I'm the kind of sad bastard who's into English and writing. I aspire to be a journalist or maybe even a novelist. I know, but hey, I have a finished novel. Nowhere close to publishable quality, and a work in progress. At least I'm doing something with my life. Back then, I spent a lot of time writing in the library. Not ashamed to admit that I wrote a bunch of smutty fanfic. This isn't relevant to the story, I promise. You're not going to have to read about Markiplier having an affair with Justin McElroy. And yes, I did write one about that. The point is, I'd often get engrossed in my writing, and wouldn't really notice who was around me. And that's why I'm not sure exactly when Andrew started hanging out in the library, sitting a few tables away from me, pretending to read a middle-grade book, but clearly watching me. Let me tell you about Andrew. Andrew was special needs, autistic, somewhere on the spectrum. He was mathematically gifted and actually a science whiz, academically very smart, but he liked reading middle-grade books. And he could not, for the life of him, communicate with his peers properly. It didn't help that he was hard of hearing. So he talked with this awkward voice that unfortunately made him sound different. There were a couple of ASL students at the school, and apparently he could hold the deepest, most intellectual conversations via sign language, on the extremely rare occasions when he could bring himself to engage with someone else. Andrew had taken to watching me. I saw him all over the place. Pretty much everyone I spoke to admitted that this was pretty odd. Now, don't get me wrong. You'd assume Andrew would be the prime target for bullying, right? Wrong. If one of the jocks saw a guy so much as give Andrew a hard time, that guy would regret it. Everyone loved him. He may have been almost incommunicado, but everyone wanted to look out for the kid. I mean everyone. So I was careful about who I mentioned Andrew's stalking to. I had a handful of friends that I'd made there, and I did bring it up to them. At first, they said, "You have to be mistaken. Andrew isn't like that. He's a gentle giant." I should mention he was nearly 7 feet tall. I'm not kidding. But then I pointed him out, showed them the way he'd watch me from corners or just openly stare, and they couldn't deny it. Andrew was, for want of a better word, stalking me. The first afternoon he followed me home, I knew I had to do something. But what? I didn't want to turn people against this otherwise harmless special needs student. All he was really doing was watching me. It wasn't lustful. You know how you can just tell when someone's lusting after you. It wasn't like that. It was like he was fascinated with me. Or that's what it seemed like at first. Maybe this will seem stupid, but I decided to do a bit of stalking of my own. I stalked Andrew stalking me. I watched him watching me and kept notes of his behavior. One of my friends helped me too, and we came to an extremely odd conclusion. He wasn't stalking me or watching me. He was making sure that he stayed near me. In some ways, this made me feel a little better, but it also made me more confused. I could not, for the life of me, work out what his motive was. And I was beginning to feel more and more alone. And then things started getting creepy. I started spotting movements in my yard late at night. My parents both worked for the military, and while we didn't live on base, they often worked late. My brother was a little 12-year-old brat who was more of an expert at video games than possibly protecting me, though I love my brother. He really wasn't going to be much use in that moment. But there was someone clearly lurking out there. The motion detector light would constantly get triggered. Then I found scraping on my car that looked like someone had tried to break the lock open late at night. Next, there was a note slipped into my locker. I don't want to recount exactly what it said, but it described what someone wanted to do to me. And let's just say it was more Patrick Bateman than Patrick Stewart. It was written in beautiful, exquisite cursive. This confused me even more. Andrew might have been a savant at many subjects, but penmanship was not one of them. I'd seen his essay work, the handwriting was like a middle schooler's. Surely he hadn't somehow persuaded another person to write this disgusting note to me. Meanwhile, he just kept watching me. He was always just sort of there. And then one day he wasn't. I found out through the grapevine that Andrew had an appointment at some kind of neurological clinic and would be gone for a few days. In that moment, I felt some relief. What a fool I was. That evening I found another note in my locker, even worse than the first, and it actually had blood smeared on it. That night I was alone. It was a Friday. Someone was in my yard making a racket, and I could see this black-clad figure, definitely not Andrew, pulling up plants and weirdly spraying the hose around. Obviously, I called the cops. I even yelled out the window that I'd called the cops. But the guy didn't leave until almost an hour later, when the sound of sirens actually blared off in the distance. I was more confused than ever. There was no doubt that Andrew was stalking me, but so was someone else. Were they in on it together? It all seemed so unlikely, and it all came to a head when I was walking home one day. It was sunny, a warm day, so I decided to skip the bus. Who followed behind me, ducking behind walls and hedges? Andrew. This wasn't normal and I was sick of it. I had to say something. So obviously, I turned to confront him. And that's when Andrew charged. Almost 7 feet of muscle barreling towards me from a few hundred feet away, and I was frozen on the spot. And then Andrew veered to the right. With a scream, he dove into an overgrown hedge on the verge of the park we were walking past. Out came flying that black-clad figure in his grasp. Andrew slammed this person down and began shaking him back and forward, bouncing his head off the grass. He was shouting something, but it was hard to tell what in the chaos. I ran forward. I had no idea whose side I was supposed to be on in that moment. Then the black-clad figure's hood fell away, and we made eye contact. He immediately let loose this tirade of disgusting slurs aimed at me, and he seemed under the impression that I duped or hired Andrew into protecting me from him. I had no idea who he was at first. Then one of my friends came running up and yelled, "The janitor!" And the conclusion is absolutely insane. Andrew, and only Andrew, had been observant enough to notice that the janitor was paying unusual attention to me. From what we could get out of him, he felt a sort of dark aura from it all. He said that a voice in his head told him to protect me. So why was that janitor behaving like this toward me? My dad's job in the military is specifically military police. The janitor had been a private about 15 years back, and Dad had been the one responsible for catching him in the middle of assaulting a female officer. He ensured that he spent time in military jail and was dishonorably discharged. When we moved that time, the janitor recognized my dad around town, researched him, discovered he'd had kids, and discovered that I went to the high school where he worked. He decided to terrorize me. I don't know what kind of voice Andrew heard telling him to protect me. I don't know if I believe in that type of thing, but I do know that I think it saved my life. Maybe he didn't go about it in the best way, but he went about it the only way he really knew how. It later turned out that the janitor had even been threatening him, promising to hurt him if he didn't stop watching me. Even that didn't put Andrew off. I did my best to befriend him after that. He wasn't exactly the kind of guy you could become best friends with, but I think he knew how grateful I was for what he'd done. I didn't stay at that school for much longer. Dad's job supposedly called him away, but I think he requested a transfer at that point. I still stay in touch with Andrew via email. We sometimes play chess online, and he kicks my butt every time. We don't really have conversations as such. It's a weird, strange relationship, really. But he's the guy who saved my life from a pretty dangerous stalker who, for all I know, would have taken things as far as killing me. So frankly, I'm happy to lose as many chess games to Andrew as he wants. I'm a high school teacher, world history, and I have been for coming up on 25 years now. I sport a buzz-cut. I rock a cardigan, and I'm kinda squishy around the middle. While my wife says it makes me lovable, I'm hardly much to look at when it comes to younger people I work with. I don't say the following to brag, not at all. If anything, it was a curse, and it was a choice to let myself go. When I just started out as a teacher in my mid-20s, I was, according to my girlfriend at the time, Hollywood attractive. My wife, who I didn't know at the time, looks at old photos of me and says I look like that Glenn Powell fellow everyone loves these days. I guess I knew I was good looking back in those days. I had flings with more than one of my female coworkers, all single, I'll let you know. When I wasn't sleeping with a young art teacher or the drama one, I'd prowl the bars for one-night hookups. You could say I was a bit of a male slut, I guess. I admit all of this because I want you to know. I want to stress as hard as I can that as soon as I entered the classroom, I became a different person. I wanted to be approachable to students, sure. But my mentor drummed it into me from day one that I could not become their friend. I had to inspire them, but I could not take them under my wing. This was in the very early 2000s too, so imagine how much worse it is now. I knew he wasn't screwing with me. Another teacher at the school I started at had left under a cloud. Supposedly, he was having an affair with a male student, and he vehemently denied it. Who knew the truth? But I swore to myself that I would never even wind up in a position where I could be under that suspicion. I like my women mature enough to hold a conversation with me, to be on my level, and most important, goddamn legal. The idea of being involved with a student sickens me, and I have nothing but contempt for the men and women who go down that path. If it feels like I'm fixating on it, there's a reason. Obviously, despite my best efforts, I found myself in a situation that became a living hell. I'll call her Billy, although that wasn't her real name. She was a senior, had just turned 18. And she really had everything. Head cheerleader, on track to be prom queen, and a very solid GPA. There was no reason for her to want more from academia than she did. Except for some reason, she wanted me. When you're a teacher, at least a good one, you can just tell when a student has a crush on you. It's usually harmless, the odd comment, a little lingering after class, and it's easy to put the kibosh on that. But with Billy it was different. She had a plan. It started off with very honest, seeming questions about her world history assignments. She'd hang around after class. Something I was pretty strict about when it came to having students alone in the classroom. At first, I thought she didn't realize, but it soon became clear that she was intentionally waiting for the classroom to clear before coming to me, with questions I realized she didn't need to ask, being the smart girl that she was. Very quickly, I had to set some firm boundaries. I spoke to some other members of staff and shared my concerns, and they agreed I was right to be worried. A couple of them had their own experiences with Billy, nothing too serious, but enough to make them uncomfortable. At the same time, I didn't want to make myself unavailable to students, so I came up with a structure where my classroom door had to be open at all times, and my buddy Chris, the English teacher, would conveniently drop by after Billy's world history class when his AP English class also got out. Billy soon stopped trying to get me alone when it became apparent that Chris was here to stay and we were maybe onto her. One day, a new member of the admin staff who wasn't aware of the whole saga told me there was a student outside the teacher's lounge asking about me. Cup of coffee in hand, I went to see who it was. It had been a month or so since I'd really heard from Billy, so I was a bit surprised to see her standing there. I was even more surprised at the somewhat revealing outfit she was wearing. I was certain that didn't meet our dress code. But I didn't want to get into all that with her, so I just asked what was up. Billy told me she was having some trouble with class, despite her grades very much saying the opposite, and asked if she could book some private tutor sessions with me to raise her grade. Of course, I said no, maybe a little too quickly. I felt a pang of guilt and tried to soften my words a little. I didn't have time for private lessons. If I offered them to her, I'd have to offer them to my entire senior class. It just wasn't possible. I did, however, offer her the number of a private tutor she could hire for further studies, a septuagenarian lady who'd been my world history teacher and tutored occasionally as part of her retirement. Surprisingly, Billy never called the number. I guess the business card caused Billy to sort of snap. That's when I started finding typed notes tucked under my windshield. They were typed on those old digital word processors that were popular in the 80s, the follow-up from typewriters, and exactly the kind of technology that a rich family such as Billy's might actually own. This didn't prove anything, of course, but the increasingly weird love letter content did. I openly ignored them entirely but made sure to file every one with the principal. By now, the entire staff was sure that Billy was the culprit. But A, we had no evidence, and B, we didn't want to accuse an innocent girl, and C, Billy's father was somewhat of a pillar of the community, working in construction building affordable housing, and also something of a large donor to the school. They were a decent family, honestly, generous, charitable, and beloved. If there was some way to handle the Billy situation without ruining her reputation, Either at school or with her parents, we wanted to take it. It became harder, though, when those love letters started to become threats. What had started as descriptions of things this person wanted to do to me in a very intimate way shifted into a much more sadistic method. It got to the point where myself and the principal were a few notes away from actually going to the cops. What if it wasn't Billy after all? What if it was some sick coincidence? Some woman I hadn't called back after what I'd considered an agreed one-night stand, or a husband I hadn't been informed about. This theory kind of fell by the wayside when I found a pair of crotchless panties tucked into a drawer in my desk. I kept my classroom locked and made sure no students could be in there alone. So how she'd gotten in was a complete mystery. And if it was Billy, she didn't want to make a secret of it. There was a crocheted letter above the lack of crotch, the first letter of her real name. While that didn't mean anything, part of me wondered if she somehow knew she'd gone too far and had to take steps to ensure I knew it was her. She knew I wouldn't call the cops on her. Handing a pair of crotchless panties over to my middle-aged female principal was one of the most embarrassing moments of my entire life, even if they were in an envelope. But I still had to explain what they were, and then stand there as she removed and studied them. She told me that this couldn't escalate, that she was genuinely concerned for me at this point, as I was young and good-looking, and made me promise that no matter how guilty I might feel, if it came to it, the law needed to get involved. We were nearing the end of the semester, though, prom and graduation and all of that, and then I'd never have to see her again. I wondered if maybe these panties were her final hurrah. How wrong I was. Much like many of the staff, I was a chaperone at the prom. Billy was a shoe-in to be prom queen along with her prom king boyfriend, Brad. I kind of hoped that maybe the romantic wind-up on stage might change things for her. Maybe help whatever was going on in her life. Christ, looking back, I was a dumb 25-year-old, and I really did not understand women or anything really. I don't remember much about the prom. I remember some students getting rowdy, and a couple of ejections for drinking on the premises. Weirdly, my biggest memory, save for the incident, is just how much Billy Idol the DJ played. He was this British guy, and the majority of his repertoire was British music. I'm not sure how well it landed with the students. But then came the announcement of prom king and queen. Of course, it was Brad and Billy. They took the stage, and Brad gave some gushing speech about how he was with the woman he loved, and he wanted to make her happy for as long as he could, and she'd always be his queen. Then Billy spoke. I'll always remember her opening gambit. She turned to Brad, smacked the crown off his head, and said, "You sicken me." Then she launched into a tirade about how he was a boy playing a man and how he constantly wanted intimacy. She said some extremely crude things that did not paint Brad in a good light. My heart broke for her. But then she turned to me and told me that I was the one she was destined to be with. That I was a real man, and we were soulmates, and we were destined to be together. Some absolute joker manning the lights put a spotlight on me. There was just complete awkward silence. What could I do? I had no choice but to tell Billy that there was no chance, that she was a child and I was an adult. I tried to be as kind as possible. I told her she'd find someone. But it couldn't be me. I told her that I did not find her attractive, that she was nothing but just some kid to me. I didn't notice, I really didn't notice, how much it actually broke her. I was staring at my shoes, worried that I couldn't finish my speech if I looked up at her. I didn't see the tears pouring down her face and all that mascara. But I did hear the slow clapping, and then the laughter erupting from the entire dance hall, all aimed at Billy, the most embarrassing, mortifying moment of her life. And I'd been the cause of it. But I didn't have time to feel guilty. I saw some movement, and I saw Billy leaping down off the stage. I saw her grab the sharp, lengthy knife that was resting near one of the prom cakes, and I saw her charge straight at me. Blade raised, prom dress flying behind her, her face blackened by mascara and tears. I did the only thing I could think to do as someone charged at me with a huge carving knife. I used my years of defensive martial arts training to sidestep her and send her sprawling to the ground. Only she didn't hit the ground. She hit a table behind me on which stood another prom sponge cake, and this one was untouched. The knife flew from her hand, and Billy slammed straight into that cake, the table collapsing under her weight. Everyone was silent for a moment, and then the crowd erupted with even more laughter. Billy pulled herself to her feet, her prom dress ruined, cake and punch and food all over her. She turned to me and stared at me, and I braced myself for the most terrifying threat of my life. All Billy said was, "I'm sorry," and then turned around and left the school gym. Long story short, Billy quite obviously needed psychiatric help that she'd hidden the need for. She managed to graduate with a high GPA, but college wasn't on the cards for her. Following the prom and her year of obsession, she spent 2 entire years in a rehabilitation institute. I expected her parents to blame me instead. They thanked me for how I handled the situation and kept me up to date with her progress. After a year, I moved schools to a different state, and they would write me occasionally. Eventually, they let me know that Billy had been released and asked if I would be willing to receive a letter from her. They told me they understood if the answer was no, but I decided to say yes. It was a single sheet containing a single paragraph, and I still have that letter to this day. I can type it verbatim. "Thank you. Thank you for not taking advantage of me. I'm sorry I pushed you so far, and I'm better now. I'm going to college in the fall. And I'm going to study world history, and I will make you proud, sir." Billy, I don't know what kind of life she's living now. I hope it's her best life, and I hope she recovered from whatever caused her behavior. But I know one thing as I near retirement. Billy taught me as many lessons as I've taught all my students over the years, and I still refuse to be alone in a classroom with anyone who isn't a colleague. I don't think Alex Crowley was his real name, but that's what he went by and that's what we called him. I didn't know him at first, not personally anyway. He was a sophomore when I was a freshman. I was a grungy skater kid in the late 90s, into Real Big Fish and Green Day and Sublime and a bit of Nirvana and Pearl Jam. I know both. And I felt kind of like a badass poser because I was into Failure, a band most of my friends didn't even know. Even more badass, I was an American fan of Jesus and Mary Chain. I'd found Darklands and Automatic in an indie record store and fallen in love with both LPs. I was a bit of a musical snob is what I mean, despite being a 90s skater kid who could do a bit of grinding and a few all-eyes and landed a 180 spin about once. But mostly just made bailing videos with my buddy. We were the skaters, the losers, the punks, and we loved it. And our heroes, our absolute idols in high school, were the trench coat goths in the year above us. Their leader was a fellow called Alex Crowley, and he claimed to be a direct descendant of famed occultist, mountaineer, ceremonial magician and founder of the religion of Thelema, Aleister Crowley. But of course, he couldn't prove that because Aleister Crowley had so many illegitimate descendants that if you were one of them, you just knew. I suppose maybe that was true. But I'm pretty sure neither of Alex's parents were secret descendants of Aleister Crowley either. And I'm pretty sure the guy ate poop too. So I'm not sure I'd brag about being related to him personally. I remember when Alex and his crew first approached us, as we were skating around. They just stood there in their trench coats, staring and scowling. There were 4 of them: Alex, Ashley, Jack, and Felicity. The only girl in the group, who I had the biggest, maddest crush on and who drove me absolutely wild in her low-cut corsets and goth makeup. She was actually nice too, unlike the others. Jack, in particular, was a thug, and I'm pretty sure he liked to hurt animals, but I won't dwell on that too much. Alex and Flick are the key players here that you'll have to remember, as well as me, Frankie, and my twin sister Kimmy, who were part of the skate crew. This is how things would play out for about a week. Our group would just nonchalantly skate around on the steps outside the high school, and Alex's group, who I later found out he nicknamed the Sons of Joseph, would just stand there watching us, kind of sneering. Then one weekend, we were hanging out at the skate park when we saw the Sons of Joseph come stalking in. One of the skaters yelled insults and derogatory terms at them. They weren't exactly seen as the cool people by the older guys. But Alex and company gave as good as they got, and we were enamored. I was even more enamored when I saw Flick walk over to us. Was she going to speak to me? Oh my God. Well, no. Actually, she spoke to Kimmy and told her she was a whiz on the skateboard. Later that night, I told Kimmy how jealous I was, and she would not let me live it down. However, being a good sister, she told me that Flick had invited her to the mall tomorrow, and maybe I could tag along. Hell yes, of course I would. Kimmy and I got there. We didn't tell the other guys. I was a little disappointed to discover that Alex, Jack, and Ashley were there too. Well, I didn't have to worry about Jack for long. He got into a fight with a security guard and got thrown out of the mall. Alex said he was done with that prick. He was a liability and didn't understand the ways. Maybe Kimmy, and I would like to take Jack's place in the Sons of Joseph. One look from Flick's bright mascaraed eyes, and I was nodding like some puppy dog. Kimmy was a little more sensible and asked what the Sons of Joseph actually meant. I remember Alex tapping his nose and saying that was something we'd discover in time. Sure. Whatever, Kimmy said. Alex replied, saying he hoped we'd brought money, because we needed whole new wardrobes to join their crew. I'm not ashamed to say that Kimmy and I came from a pretty wealthy family, and Kimmy was trusted with Dad's credit card. Not me though. He knew I'd waste it on probably video games. She was pretty certain that spending the money on clothes would please our parents. Alex, Ashley, and Flick led us to a hot topic. My outfit was a trench coat, a Misfits t-shirt, and a pair of leather pants that squeaked when I walked. I wasn't so sure about this, but Alex promised me the squeaking would eventually wear off. I thought about buying some cool boots, but they convinced me that my purple and black skater DCs looked kind of dope with the goth outfit. Kimmy, meanwhile, got dressed out by Flick. I got to say, it was extremely disconcerting to see my sister in fishnets, a miniskirt, and a mesh top with her bra visible beneath. In fact, I actually tried to persuade her that our parents really wouldn't approve of that. She kind of listened and bought a second outfit that was more like a velour dress and made her look like a vampire. I suppose that was pretty cool. I could tell that Alex had eyes for Kimmy, and I wasn't sure how I felt about that. I wasn't sure how I felt about him at all now that I'd spent an afternoon with him. He talked and talked and talked, and he talked about his connection to Aleister Crowley and the magic and crap like that. Ashley brought up the Satanic Bible, and Alex laughed. I kid you not, for 5 minutes straight in the food court at KFC, before declaring that Anton LaVey was a fraud who wouldn't know true Satanism if it bit him in the ass. I figured now wasn't the best time to tell them that Kimmy and I were Christians, so we just nodded along. I did do some reading about Ptolemaic lore and the Order of the Golden Dawn and things like that over the next few months, because I'm nothing if not academically curious. It amused me to discover that Alex was basically just making up crap. None of the garbage he spewed was accurate at all. Even though by then I'd already realized he was a complete charlatan. It was nice to have something to laugh with Kimmy about. Speaking of Kimmy, Alex was constantly, relentlessly trying to get into her pants. Kimmy could hold her own, and had obviously no interest in letting Alex take her virginity, but it still made me defensive. He was a creep and a weirdo. Not only that, he was always claiming to hear voices from his true father. He could never decide whether his true father was Aleister Crowley or Satan himself. In his head, I think they were sort of interchangeable. One of the messages he mysteriously received was that Kimmy should engage in intimate magic with him, when she flat out refused. He said that dancing naked for him with sigils drawn on her body would be enough. Kimmy stopped hanging out with him after that. Too exhausting, she said. She begged me to ditch them too. But at this point I'd kind of abandoned all my other friends. To make matters worse, I was deeply, hopelessly head over heels in love with Flick. And it wasn't unrequited either. We were a couple, but we had to keep it a secret from Alex because, according to him, the sons of Joseph, male or female, must only lay with him and nobody else. Ashley had ditched the group by this time too, and started hanging out with the chess club. We had a new member by the name of Norbit, I'm being serious. A nerdy kid whose presence I couldn't even begin to explain. So the only way for me and Flick to be together was to pretend to tolerate Alex. Any attempt we made to ditch him resulted in him mysteriously appearing or showing up at my house, which was even worse, because I didn't want him anywhere near my sister. Things would have been fine, I think, if Alex hadn't suddenly had an influx of hormones and decided that his true father was sending him messages that we all needed to obey. Suddenly Norbit's presence made sense. He was a member of the AV club, and Alex's dark father had instructed him to rig a video camera hidden in the vents in the female changing rooms so we could corrupt the fairer sex in the name of Satan without them even knowing. Of course, Flick and I were horrified by this, and Kimmy wanted to kill Alex as soon as I told her. But simply talking about something wasn't a crime. We needed proof that he was actually planning on doing it. He gave Norbit a list of times for the recordings. I stole a copy and surprise, surprise, they were all times when Kimmy would be coming out of the gym or out of the pool. This creep was basically planning to stalk my sister by filming her naked. I took Norbit to one side, and Flick and I told him in no uncertain terms that if he went ahead with his plan, We would not only ruin him and his entire high school career, but there was a good chance we'd end his life too. This dumb freshman, I was a sophomore at this point, Flick was a junior, fell for it. I guess took it so seriously that he changed schools within the month. When it became clear to Alex that his plan to film the girls' locker room had failed, he flew into a rage. He slammed me up against the wall of the AV room, which we now had the keys to thanks to Norbit, and told me that this wasn't going to happen, and that I was going to have to be the one to film Kimmy. I'd be able to do it at home easily, and his true father, the Dark Lord, would bestow upon me untold riches. I told him where he could shove his untold riches, and if he came anywhere near us again, he'd wish he'd never been born. Finally, myself, Kimmy, and Flick were free. Flick and I were able to date openly now, and Kimmy didn't have to worry about this creep trying to, well, creep on her. Or so we thought. One night, Kimmy, Flick, and I were hanging out in Kimmy's bedroom playing 3-player GoldenEye deathmatch, and suddenly a red light kept glaring on the screen. Initially, Kimmy jokingly blamed one of us, saying we were trying to put her off with a laser pointer. But then the red light quickly disappeared, and we heard some scuffling and banging outside. I ran to the window to see this trench-coated figure fleeing into the night. It was obviously Alex. He'd been testing to see if he could film Kimmy himself through her bedroom window. Flick had the dumbest yet funniest idea. Using our brand new color printer, we printed out a huge image of a fat man's ass and taped it on the window. Then we waited for Alex to come back that night, which we knew he would. We heard him out there. He was hardly subtle. Kimmy yelled that she was going to take a shower, and we gave it 10 minutes. Then we pulled the blinds open, revealing the large printout of that ass. I guess Alex had been filming, because we heard this sort of strangled shriek, and then the clattering of something falling to the floor, and saw that a trench-coated figure was running away again. When we went out there, the school's camcorder lay abandoned in the flower bed. We watched through the tape. It turned out he'd filmed Kimmy more than we thought. We were all watching when she snatched the videotape away from us and watched the next few minutes alone. Her face went pale. "Just underwear," she said. "But I feel sick." Kimmy didn't tell us anything else. Neither of us asked either. But a few days later, Alex was found with both of his legs broken, apparently by a baseball bat, and he claimed he'd been jumped by a gang of black guys. When we asked Kimmy if she planned to pursue the video any further, she just said no. I don't want to say that my sister kneecapped a goth stalker while in high school, but let's just say years later, and even though you passed away 6 years ago, I'll always be proud of you, Kimmy. My high school years took place in the mid-2000s. I'm a female, and for most of my high school career, probably until senior year, my entire friend group was made up of girls and one single guy called Guy, who was probably the gayest fellow you could ever meet. We all had this weird thing, where we decided that none of us were going to date during high school. This completely went out the window during senior year when I guess hormones just became too much. But as far as I know, most of us stuck to it. Sure, we snuck a kiss at a party here and there. I'm not saying we were prude little good girls, but we had this pact with each other that we were just going to focus on our studies. That's why we were so shocked when one of our girlies, perhaps the most straight-laced, accidentally let slip that she had a motherfucking sugar daddy. We grilled our friend Samantha within an inch of her life. What had he bought her? Shoes, clothes, jewelry. She had it all to display. Was she physical with him? Of course. Very much so. She was sorry she'd broken the pact, but Mr. X might be the one, and she didn't want to let that slip through her fingers. Not when he was so much older than her. Of course, that was scandalous by itself and led to another round of questioning. How old was he? Mid-40s. Was he married? Samantha shyly admitted that yes, he was married with kids. Did we know this guy? Samantha said no, but her hesitation in her eyes said yes. It was a man in his 40s with kids that we knew. We pretended to let it drop. We lied and said we were happy for her. Of course, we were all pretty disgusted that our 16-year-old friend was being taken advantage of by a 45-year-old man who was clearly lying about leaving his wife for her and keeping her sweet by giving her some fairly gaudy stuff. I don't know much about sugar daddies, but honestly, I would have expected a little more from the gifts. She said he took her out to dinner too, and stayed in some nice hotels, but still, so we pretended to drop it, and instead, we all secretly spied on Samantha individually. I know it sounds awful, but I'll stand by it. We didn't want our friend being seduced by some dirty old man. There was one guy whose name kept coming up, Mr. Kurswell, one of the science teachers. Samantha would often meet with him after class, and while we couldn't spy for too long, it was absolutely the only lead we had. Mr. Kurswell became our target, and there was definitely something off about him. He'd sneak phone calls into hidden corners during lunch break. If he was using his laptop when class started, he'd often slam it closed and make sure we weren't looking before he opened it again. There was something very off about this guy, and we became more and more convinced that this balding, bespectacled biology teacher was the one boinking our buddy. But the question was, what next? That's when Guy had this bright idea of trying to follow Mr. Kurswell one weekend. We had no idea where he'd go or when he'd go, but we decided to time it for a Saturday, where Samantha had also refrained from hanging out and heavily claimed she had a hot date with her mystery sugar daddy. If it was Kurswell, then boom, we were in luck. If not, maybe we'd catch sight of the real culprit. We all loaded into Guy's car and, apparently as subtle as a cop tailing a suspect, we followed Samantha for nearly an hour and found ourselves in the next town over. It was one of those little towns that you kind of look down on. Jokes about the folks there being inbred and the fact that there was a weird smell and just kind of overall crappy. Not exactly the place you'd expect a hot date with a sugar daddy. Samantha headed into this crappy mall, and we followed at a pretty long distance. It became clear pretty quickly that she was checking out some stores. There were 4 of us without Samantha, so we decided it didn't make sense for the entire group to tail her. We'd be spotted in an instant, and she was headed mostly into these girly stores, so despite his penchant for glitter and pink, we figured Guy should hang back. It was decided that I was the most nondescript and unnoticeable. Not sure if that was a compliment, but it worked well enough here. So I followed Samantha into a bunch of stores, and what I saw shocked me. The gifts her sugar daddy had been bestowing on her, she was shoplifting them. I followed her into 4 stores and watched as she stole costume jewelry, lingerie, a crop top, and all sorts of crap. Not once did she get spotted by security either. I hightailed it out of there. I didn't want to get wrapped up in all of that, and I didn't want to look complicit. I met my friends at the agreed point, a sort of hidden area where we weren't in much danger of being spotted by Samantha. I was all ready to hit them with my revelation, but I didn't have a chance. They were the ones who hit me with the gossip. We were right. Our science teacher, Mr. Kurswell, was here in the same mall as Samantha, and what more proof did we need? I waited until they finished chattering and then told them what I'd observed. There was no sugar daddy offering gifts. Samantha was a kleptomaniac. Presumably, she'd traveled to the next town over because the local mall security were getting suspicious in our town. Everyone was absolutely baffled. They'd definitely seen Kurswell, and he definitely seemed sketchy, and at the same mall as Samantha too. Could it be possible that they were having a fling? But the gifts were stolen for our benefit to try and justify all of it. Or had we been stalking our friend for literally no reason? It didn't make any sense. Why would Kurswell be at this mall? It was over an hour outside of town, and our local mall was 1,000 times better. All we could do was head out and plan to head home. But first, we decided to stop by the food court to grab some McNuggets. And that's when we saw him, Mr. Kurswell sat at a goddamn McDonald's two-seater holding hands with someone who was not his wife. And it wasn't Samantha either, Mr. Kurswell and the man whose hand he held both turned to us. The unknown man looked puzzled. Mr. Kurswell looked sick. He stood up and immediately began pleading for us to come over. Let's get this straight, if we hadn't suspected Kurswell of being Samantha's sugar daddy, we would have gone on liking the dude. He was one of our favorite teachers, in fact, and now he looked close to tears. The idea of him having an affair, even if it was to hide the truth of his identity, kind of made me feel sick. And the first thing I thought was, his poor wife. But then he called us over and explained everything. His wife knew. She too was of the same kind of proclivities as he was. She'd also always wanted kids, which were indeed his. And they both loved their kids very much. They loved each other too, but in their own little way. But this whole business had begun years ago, before homosexuality was quite so acceptable. The whole deal they had with the kids and an unusual marriage. It had been a long-term lie that they just didn't want to have to explain to friends and family. He said we could call his wife if we wanted. He said he knew we were good kids. And he said he was sure that some of us understood, looking pointedly at Guy at this point. And that's how the stalking of our best friend and our science teacher led us to helping him and his wife cover up their unconventional marriage. We provided alibis and did all sorts of things. We also kind of cut Samantha off after we tried our best to talk her out of being a klepto. She refused and also saw no problem with the sugar daddy lie. We didn't tell her anything about Kurzweil, but we did tell her we'd had a suspect, and she didn't seem to care about their well-being. It just made us realize that people are never who they seem to be or who you expect them to be. As a funny aside, Guy, who is the campiest, gayest man I've ever met, eventually realized that he was just as into women as he was into men. Now he's one of the biggest players, in a nice way, that I've ever met. Mr. Kurzweil still lives with his wife, and their kids have gone off to college now. They're considering finally living their true lives. The kids know the truth and have done so for many years. But ultimately, it's whatever makes them happy. All I'm glad is that our one little jaunt into stalking didn't lead to the ruination of multiple lives. But I'll tell you what, from now on, I've decided that unless it seems like someone's in danger, nothing is my business to get involved in. It was my idea to put on a horror production. We were the alternative theater kids. We begged the drama teacher to let a bunch of us do our own thing. And instead of yet another performance of West Side Story or Grease, all our bitching worked, and eventually Mrs. J relented. My friend Kirsten wrote the script. It was a slasher play rife with squibs and blood and fake ghosts and low on plot. Really, nobody was going to attend expecting to see Waiting for Godot, though. They wanted blood, guts, and one shocking scene, boobs. Don't worry, we used prosthetics. None of us were getting our boobs out for a goddamn school play. Plus, we didn't want to get expelled, obviously. We practiced that play for God knows how many times, and at that stage we knew it off by heart. But something we'd never done was perform it at night, and that's when it would be debuting as a horror play. So of course, we begged and pleaded with Mrs. J to let us start one final rehearsal at 8 p.m. It took some cajoling, but she relented. The grumpy, scary janitor even agreed to stay late to keep an eye on us so we didn't break his crap. We were all excited. There were 8 of us in total, 6 players, the director, and the lighting and sound guy. I won't list all 8 names because you'll forget them all. But the 4 important ones are me, Aya, Victor as an actor, Jude as an actor who plays the killer, and Clyde as an actor, the tragic hero. We ran through the first scene where a few of the characters are playing spin the bottle in a cabin in the woods. The bottle stops 5 times, creating the shape of a pentagram, and a visual effect causes a mysterious puff of smoke to leave the bottle. Dead impressive. Of course, all the characters decide it's the ghost of Rancid Jack, a serial killer who stalked those woods 100 years ago. And of course, it is. The rest of the play continues with the characters getting picked off by Rancid Jack one by one until only Vicky, the virgin final girl, and Clyde, the boyfriend, are left. After we ran through the first scene, 2 of the actors went outside for a smoke break and never returned. It didn't matter too much. We just decided to mess around, tweaking some of the practical effects. The sound guy did a bunch of improvements too. I really think we had something special on our hands. To this day, I swear that if we'd actually got to perform this damn play, it would have gone down in our high school history, and not just because of the prosthetic bloody boobs. Eventually, we needed our 2 missing actors, so the other actor, Isla, went to look for them. She didn't return either, but we did hear a scream. This caused Jude and Clyde to go running out into the barely lit corridor. Me and Vicky stayed behind like the nervous girls we were. And of course Denny, the sound guy, had to stay and protect us. This was his excuse anyway. Eventually, Clyde and Jude returned looking pale and terrified. There had been no sign of any of the missing 3 except for a bucket load of blood. Some of it was outside, and some of it was in the corridor. Of course, we all started freaking out. The only person in the building who wasn't accounted for was the freaky janitor, Mr. Williams. All sorts of rumors circulated about this guy. He was an ex-con. He'd spent time inside for killing a man in a bar fight. He'd fought in Vietnam and had the highest kill count in his unit. He had a tin of Viet Cong teeth in his little basement office. One student swore blind they'd seen it before Williams had chased him off. There was no doubt in my mind, freaked out by constant horror play rehearsals and the alleged blood, that this janitor had killed our friends. Maybe he'd watched the play and it had triggered Nam flashbacks. Who knew? Denny and Vicky and Jude volunteered to go get help, which thinking back now was kind of an odd group. Why three of them? All I knew was that this left me with Clyde, my IRL boyfriend, and I wasn't going to argue against holing up with him. We hid in the sound booth and listened in horror, as we heard running footsteps and screams and even pleas for help. All three of our friends had met grisly fates, we thought, and that just left us. We had no choice but to try and escape the building and call the cops. Clyde grabbed a heavy metal bar, and we made our way into the corridors. If there had been blood there before, it was gone now. Williams must have cleaned it up, and there was no sign of the bodies either. I was crying, begging Clyde to protect me, begging him not to let me die. And then up ahead of us, the door to the maintenance area burst open. The janitor stood there, some pole held in his hand and a look of fury on his face. He yelled, asking what the hell we thought we were doing. Clyde didn't even think to stop. He charged Williams with the metal pipe and cracked him in the skull, sending him collapsing to the ground. Then Clyde went to town, hammering the guy's leg so he couldn't come after us. Between the grunts, he told me that he didn't want to kill him, that he had to face justice, but he had to make sure the guy never walked again and couldn't come after us. By the time he was done, Williams's right leg was a bloody pulp, and the left had visible bone fractures in 3 places. Williams was trying to say something. Blood was bubbling out of his mouth, but Clyde kicked him in the side. Then the door burst open, and the rest of the cast yelled, "Surprise!" The cry died on their lips as they saw Williams lying on the floor, Clyde standing over him with a bloody dripping pipe like a madman. The whole thing had been an idiotic, ill-fated prank. Everyone was in on it except for myself and Clyde and Mr. Williams. Apparently the prank ruined all of our lives. Despite thinking he was protecting his girlfriend from a stalker, Clyde faced charges when Williams quite understandably demanded that the full weight of the law come down upon him. Due to the extenuating circumstances, he only spent a couple of years in juvie, but it still ruined his life. The others had to live with the guilt of what they caused. They were all expelled, of course, and more than one of them ended up taking a dark path through life. From what I know, at least one of them has ended their life over that guilt. As for me, I don't know that I'll ever get over it, seeing Clyde defend me like that only to mutilate an innocent man. Even then, I can't convince myself that there wasn't a serial killer trying to take us all out that night. My head is a mess. I've been in and out of institutes, and my latest therapist recommended that I blog about my teenage drama. I don't know if sending my story is the best, most cathartic idea. I know many will tell me I'm a terrible person, and that we all deserve what we got. Maybe that's what I need to hear. Maybe I need to accept that we all jumped the gun and acted like complete idiots. I know we did. I guess I just need to self-flagellate. All I want to say is, Mr. Williams, if you happen to hear this from heaven or wherever you are right now, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of that. You weren't a stalker. And I'm sorry my boyfriend crippled you.